Hello, welcome back to Visited by Voices Live on Monday. Happy holidays to all of my American brethren. Today is an episode that we intended to go in a different direction than we ultimately will. There was a guest lined up and we had to reschedule, and we're going to have to make do with what we got. So I hope none of you will bail on the first few minutes of this video. The holiday is always a weird time to do anything because most years people are out barbecuing, and that's not clearly the case this year. This year, we're probably all sitting around looking at screens of one type or another, or in a group setting of less than 10 people or 5 people or 25 or whatever your state is telling you is the point at which people will burst into flames if they're above that person count. So I hope you're joining us today, but if you're not, I hope you catch this on rewind because I did not announce the guest for tonight, but I do have someone that you, I believe, should be familiar with. Let me welcome to Visited by Voices Live, Mr. Pizowell. Wow, I managed to screw up your name. How's that?
It happens. It happens. How are you?
I am good. How are you, sir?
Doing good. Doing good. Yeah.
So, did you get out and enjoy any of the holiday today, or were you barricaded in your house with your doors and windows duct taped closed as we have been?
No. Let's see. What did I do today? I had McDonald's with my girlfriend, and then I took a nap.
And that's a pretty normal Monday, isn't it?
That was my Memorial Day. Yeah, that was my Memorial Day. And of course, now I'm hanging out with you.
Well, then it's a better than normal Monday. So how's that different than a regular Memorial Day for you?
Good question. It doesn't differ very much at all, to be honest.
So I saw you put up a video today about the lodge, and before I want to start there because I really loved the lodge. I mean, but it's a film you can't really talk about.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a good thing, actually, because it means it does things that are surprising and different. Not that it doesn't telegraph itself, but it's such a mood piece and an atmosphere piece that you don't completely trust it. It's twisty.
Mm-hmm.
So it's funny because in most of your reviews, I can tell very early on whether you loved, hate, or were kind of indifferent about a movie. I did not know before your review started where you'd fall on this movie at all. When in the lodge, not talk about plot points, but how far into the lodge did you realize that it was something special this year?
Oh, goodness. Very early on, because I mean, like you said, it's very much a mood piece, and it's a very tense and uncomfortable movie. And it kind of, I don't know, it got under my skin very early. And it made me feel very uncomfortable. It made me feel like I didn't know what was going to happen. I mean, I even said in my review, I mean, I didn't know. At one point, I thought the movie was taking place in another dimension. So, I mean, that's very rare. That's very seldom that a movie does that for me. Where I feel like I'm in the hands of a filmmaker that I can't trust, and I can't tell what's going to. I knew it wasn't going to end well. Put it that way. I knew it was not going to end well.
It's a film that, even though at that point the plot doesn't start, within the first 5 minutes, you know there is no way this is going to be a happy ride.
No, not at all. Yeah, and even then, like I said in the review, I mean, even knowing and sort of bracing myself for the fact that, yeah, this is not going to end well. The ending just, oh my God, I loved it. I loved it.
Would you say this is Alicia Silverstone's best performance?
I didn't even know Alicia Silverstone was in the movie.
Neither did I when I went in.
It took, and it actually took me about a minute before it dawned on me that that's Alicia Silverstone. So I mean, I like that, and that was a movie that I saw very little marketing on, and what little I did see, it did not give anything. Like I had no idea she was in the movie. So I mean, that movie to me was just, it was marketed perfectly. It was just, you know, not her best performance, I would say. Let's see, what are some good Alicia? Well, Clueless, of course. I'm sure you're a big fan of Clueless, right?
I've never actually seen Clueless. I own the soundtrack. It has the Muffs on it, so
yeah, you know, it's a good movie. you should watch it.
I'll put that right on the list. So the reason I wanted to start with The Lodge is really because it was one of the films in the last couple of years that's made me feel like I used to feel about horror all the time, or most of the time anyway. You know, there's been films like Boot and Game Over that have made me feel that way, and certainly Hellfest. But I'm getting that feeling less and less, it feels like, and that the diamonds in the rough are still shining really bright, but I'm digging harder for them. And that made me think of the rest of the horror community and how it can be so much different than when I think you and I came up. I think that you almost have to be an active participant to find the good stuff these days.
Right.
So
that's very true. Now I do have to say, I have been on a really good run here lately of newer horror movies that I've really liked. I saw We Summon the Darkness. I saw Gretel and Hansel, which I actually enjoyed. I saw The Wretched, which
I've not seen it yet.
I saw The Wretched. I should have a review of it coming out tomorrow.
Now do you know the thing about The Wretched? It's in theatrical release right now and has been for a month.
It's number one at the box office.
It's number one at the box office for its fourth week.
That is insane.
Of course, the numbers are ridiculous. It wouldn't even chart in a normal year.
No.
But I severely hope when they put this thing out on all platforms, they just trumpet that as a success.
Oh, they should, absolutely. Yeah, number one box office hit, The Wretched.
For a month.
Exactly.
It did what Titanic did.
Yeah. It's breaking horror movie records. Has there been another horror movie that was number one at the box office for that many weeks in a row?
I think Silence of the Lambs is and I think Misery had at least 3 weeks, but there's not many, and they're all high profile projects, not like The Wretched.
The Wretched, not high profile at all. But yeah, I thought that was pretty funny. It's it's been number one at the box office. Because I was even thinking, like, the box office, how are they counting that? But yeah, there's drive-ins and there's a few theaters open. So
there's a couple experimental theaters in the Midwest that actually have separate rooms, and like it's normal this way. Movies start whenever you want them to start. You make an appointment, you come in, they project. It's basically a large television set, and those operations are still going. There's only like a couple of those screens, but it might be the future. It really might.
Yeah, I'm completely unaware of that kind of,
I think you're going to see a lot of innovation going forward. I really do.
But yeah, I've had a really good run lately with newer horror movies, and that's made me feel really good. But I mean, all of those movies are really, I mean, The Lodge was a Hammer movie. And I mean, I knew Hammer was still around, but when I saw the Hammer pop up at the beginning of the movie, I was like, oh, cool. And I mean, what the Wretched is IFC Midnight, and Gretel and Hansel was what, I don't even know what Gretel and Hansel was, but smaller films. But yeah, to go back to what you said earlier, I mean, when I first discovered horror and became very serious about it, there was no digging. There was no deep dive digging. I was awash in stuff. It was like a big game of catch up. You know what I mean? There was just so much out there. at that time. The video store was just a gold mine, you know.
Yeah, and it's weird because when I was growing up, the video store experience was actually new, so everything was exciting. And then all these great titles, both old and new, were coming out. You could go to the theater on any given weekend and see a horror film, and the quality varied, but it didn't vary like it varies now.
Mm.
And this got me thinking about how people get into the genre. It's a question I ask most people who come on this show. So, how did you become the monster kid? How did you discover the genre and realize that it was something that was going to be important to you?
I don't know. I I guess maybe I was just attracted to you know, scary, morbid, macabre stuff. Which I don't know where that comes from, but I was that kid for sure. I was the kid in kindergarten that had a jean jacket with a skull on the back of it. Um, but I don't know. I just remember being at the video store. This is one of my earliest memories at the video store, standing in front of the horror section and just being, you know, jaw on the floor, looking at all of those video boxes, Evil Dead 2 and Evil Dead, and um, on and on and on. I think I was just in love. It was kind of like a 2001 moment of just and that was, I think that was it. That was it. That's one of my earliest memories, and I don't know. I fell in love that day, and I've horror has been a mistress ever since.
And one that doesn't cheat on you.
No, no.
So, here's the thing though. Do you think that kids coming up today who are scrolling on Netflix or Shutter or on their phones through titles, deciding what to watch, are they getting the same experience? I mean, or are they getting an analog experience, something that's similar enough, or are we just aged out? I mean, what do you think's going on?
See, I don't know. I don't know what their experience is, because my experience with streaming and Netflix is that I spend far more time scrolling than I do watching. Um, and I don't know if that's just my experience, but I mean that's how I treat it. I'll get on I was on Amazon Prime last night just looking through what they had, and by the time I got done, I was like, I don't want to watch anything. So that's been my story, really. Um, and yeah, I mean the experience has changed. Not having the video store, I think, is definitely. I don't know. I mean, I don't know. It's a good question. I don't really know the answer to it. I know there are a lot of young people who are very interested in horror, but I don't know if they turn to Netflix and streaming to really get, to find those movies. I, I I don't know how many people message me, younger people, and I ask, um, where should I start? I saw this movie. I saw the original Halloween. I love it. Where do I go now? Kind of thing. You know what I mean? And I envy them because they've got, such a road ahead of them. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
But so I honestly, I think a lot of them are turning to, the sage, wise old folks like us for guidance in the in horror.
I hope so. I think that's a hopeful message because I certainly turned to older parts of the horror community when I was growing up. I mean, I didn't always get to meet them face to face or virtually online, but someone was programming the UHF stations,
Mm-hmm.
and that's how you discover the Hammer Karnstein trilogy, which I still to this day think is a cornerstone of modern horror. We don't talk about it because it's not as sexy to talk about as Halloween or Night of the Living Dead or Texas Chainsaw Massacre, but those movies did things that cinema was not supposed to be doing, and it happened
Mm-hmm.
in our genre because Horror is the genre where the experimentation happens. After horror kicks down the door, then other people can do it. You don't get Scarface without Texas Chainsaw Massacre. You just
Right.
don't. I mean, you get Scarface, the Muni film. You don't get the Pacino film.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
So, are you a little disturbed that discovering something like We Summon the Darkness or The Lodge, not that The Lodge did play theatrically, but it was a short window.
Mm-hmm.
Is it disturbing to you that we're not having the video store moment? That you could easily have just scrolled right past those titles if someone didn't say, "Hey, give that a shot." Because I think about it all the time. What am I missing because no one has pointed it out to me?
Right. Right. Well, yeah. I mean, I can't tell you how many times growing up in the video store, somebody would recognize me as being somebody they see in there all the time. So they ask, what about this movie or that movie? Or they even ask the video store guy, well, what about, you know, whatever. They don't get that one-on-one today. But again, I think that's where they turn to, like, okay, so here's this movie on Netflix. It's called Absentia. Let me look up Absentia reviews on YouTube. Okay, here's this guy's. Oh, he likes it. Okay, let's rent it. Let's watch it. I think that's how a lot of people are, and myself too, honestly. Which I don't like to read a lot of reviews or watch a lot of reviews for movies if I really want to see them. But if it's just something random that I'm like, I will look up and see, well, what are critics saying? What have the critics said? And not just any critic, but like, what is somebody that I trust in the horror community on here? What have they said about it?
Well, that's the whole reason I think we need to really reinforce and build new scaffolding for the horror community, is because I trust the people that you're looking at on our sidebar in the chat more than I trust professional reviewers or the big horror sites at this point. We need a trustable source. We really do. And I think we have that if you go searching for it. But I really think that people like yourself have laid the groundwork to really create that community. Now it's just time. We got to just circle the wagons. We got to bring people on board. We got to make sure that even ultimately the independent filmmakers understand that there's an audience for us, and we will respond. But we've never had that window before, and that's what I think is important going forward. So I'm going to use the example of Boot Part 1, The Haunted Ship. I'm very lucky. I have an Indian movie theater that, when we're not under, end times rules, I could go see. And I tend to see as many foreign horror films as I can, but not everyone has that ability. So there's a lot of films I've screamed to the high heavens about. And there's a lot of films I don't mention at all because they're not worth mentioning. But is it safe to say, like, you wouldn't have probably stopped on Boot without that recommendation?
Probably not, because I had to literally search for Boot. Mm-hmm. Boot didn't just pop up in like I'm scrolling through horror or whatever Netflix recommends, for me in the horror category. But I mean, I consider myself pretty adventurous. I mean, I know that, when you find a diamond in the rough, doesn't it just feel so good, and you want to run to the hilltop and say, hey, watch this friggin' movie, you want to champion this film. So I mean, I've always been somebody who's wanted to deep dive, and even if the cover of the movie looks horrible, even if the images on the back of the box look like they were shot in somebody's backyard, let's still give it a shot. And I've sat through so many ridiculously horrible films, but occasionally something like Leaf Yonkers Darkness happens, or there are dozens of others, but you sit through a lot of really bad ones to see the good diamonds in the rough. And when you find that good diamond in the rough, it makes it all worth it.
So that leads me to kind of think about like the films that when they came out in the 80s and 70s that were not popular, that were actively disliked or talked down to. If you talk to genre fans, or if you read your Fangorias or your Rue Morgues later on, that now have kind of a second life, and people seem to be accepting of those titles. A good example would be Halloween 3,
Mm-hmm.
which you could not, that film could not buy its way out of prison for many, many years.
Mm-hmm.
Today, it has a kind of side fan base from the proper Halloween franchise, but I would almost say that size franchise, besides the original Halloween, is as big as any of the sequels.
Mm-hmm.
So, do you think we're going to see that kind of revision going forward with these movies that are now struggling to get notice on streaming services because there aren't the video stores? Or do you think that those days are gone, and because there's so much product coming out, they're just going to get lost in the wave?
Yeah. I don't, that's a good question. I don't know. I mean, my knee-jerk reaction is no. Because I don't know, the way movies are made are just different today. Those movies, there was almost an innocence about those movies that modern movies just don't have today. And it's hard to say that when you're talking about a movie like, I don't know, The Burning, saying that's a movie with innocence. That's an innocent film. You know what I mean? But I don't know. They just don't make movies today like they used to. So there's a. I think with Halloween 3 in particular, there's sort of the, everybody loves an underdog. Some people love like the black sheep kind of movies, and there have been movies that I watched that I hated, and then I went back and watched them years later, and I was like, hey, this isn't bad at all. So, but I don't see that happening. I don't know. I don't see a movie like The Lodge being discovered, 10 years from now, being like, oh man, this is, it's just not it's just not the same. That might be a bad example. That's a really, really, different kind of movie, but I don't know. I think it's just a different time. I don't really think so. No, I don't think so.
And I think that once the inevitable happens, which we know no one wants to happen, but when physical media has breathed its last gasp and it is a purely digital world, I think that it's going to be very hard because no one's going to have all the streaming services, and no one's going to pay for a la carte to try everything out, because that's just as expensive as cable and your Blockbuster rental budget used to be. So I agree with you. I think it's going to be a big world, and that's kind of why we have to have these conversations. There has to be an underground marketplace of people pointing in the direction of the stuff that's worthwhile. And again, I think your channel has been a forefather of that entire concept. You've been reviewing films online as from a fan point of view for almost a decade, right?
Over a decade now.
Over a decade.
Yeah.
So I don't think many people have much to say on you being the forefather of what needs to happen. But I don't mean to make it sound like what we do is important per se. But I think it's a crucial thing that we are doing, not necessarily that it's our work. Because I think that there's just too many films out there. No one gets to see it all. And it's easy to get sidetracked. Hey, let's watch Tiger King. And meanwhile, you miss out on Sea Fever or We Summon the Darkness or one of the other new films that is worthwhile. And in a month, there's a bunch of new films that are worthwhile. So the chances of you going back are even less.
Yeah. That happens a lot. I have a watch list, and eventually movies fall off the watch list because the watch list just gets longer and longer, and
only so many hours in a day.
Yeah, exactly.
So on the other hand, let's talk about something, the other side of it, which is that sometimes we're uncomfortable, and this isn't true of your channel in particular, but sometimes we're uncomfortable to talk about films that we really don't like. Not the things that we think are wretched, not the film, the wretched, but if we think a film's really bad, then it's fun to talk about. Right. But the films that are just disappointing, a lot of times I find myself saying, I'm not doing a review of that. Because what am I really going to say? And, maybe someone out there will like it. But I think that's part of the conversation that we need to have as well. Because we have to get to the point where we think we let people know that mediocre films, or films that are going to be for some people and others, they need that exposure too.
Yeah, those are really the ones that are really bad are fun to review, and the ones that are really good are fun to review. The ones that are just kind of middle of the kind of like Underwater. Like I watched Underwater with every intention of reviewing it, but then at the end of it, I was like, well, what am I? What is there really even to discuss? This is a movie that starts in second gear and ends in second gear. It never, it's not a bad movie. I've seen much better. I've seen much worse, but it just there's very little energy in this film. So I mean, what that's a 2-minute review. You know what I mean? And then I'm on the fence about it. You may like it, you may not. It's just not. I don't know. It's those are very difficult films to review.
And I think with a film like that, the other problem is, of course, that you had all the major sites come out singing its praises. So you almost can't review it without like this cloud hanging over you of saying it's middle of the road seems almost like a cop out.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
But if it's the honest review, that's what we should be putting out there.
Mm-hmm.
And look, we all have films that we love that the majority dislike, and we all have films that we don't like that the majority do love. I have more of the latter than anyone wants to think about, but it's one of those things. I think that the honesty of each fan reviewer is worth a million Ebert reviews. It really is. And we're to the point where as you can watch Cannibal Holocaust or Maniac at the click of a button on a mainstream streaming service.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
This is no longer the trench coat movie theater world or renting the video from that was put as close to the curtain where the adult films were stocked as possible.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same rate, all this access is not leading us to more variety. In a way, it's leading us to less because we seem to be all looking at the same movies.
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel that way, or am I off base?
No, I agree. I agree because there is this, well, and I think it goes back to there's only so many hours in the day. Do you want to spend those hours watching a movie that you know is good, that you love, or do you want to take a risk on something that Do you want to rewatch the original Black Christmas for the 12th time, or do you want to take a risk and watch the remake? Just you know what I mean? So, or even a movie, we were talking about The Lodge, to bring that up again. We both said it's a very dark movie. That's going to turn a lot of people off to it right there because they don't want to watch that. They would rather watch Nightmare on Elm Street 4. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
I don't blame them. That just may not be their bag, but The Lodge is a much better film. It's a movie that's going to make you feel. It's a movie that I think it's a really important movie. But I can understand why people don't take risks, and sometimes I don't want to really take risks either. It's like I don't know, that warm blanket. You know what I mean? I don't know. Maybe that's, I don't know.
Hey, listen, in the 2 years that Hellfest has been out, I've watched the film a dozen times.
Yeah.
That doesn't happen by accident.
Right.
You watch a couple bad new films and you just rush back to the last thing that made you feel really good.
Yeah. Well, and again, the when you're talking about new films, you're talking about, I mean, what are we talking about here? Most of the theatrical stuff is what? Remakes and reboots and sequels. So it's not really a new film. It's a new film with an old formula. So why would I want to rewatch why would I want to watch the new Candyman when I know that the old Candyman is really good? And this new Candyman's probably not going to be good. Just I hate to be that guy, but it just doesn't look good. And what I've heard about it doesn't make me feel otherwise.
You're on the right show to not feel good about Candyman.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I know the old one is good. I've seen it before. I love it. So why waste time on, because it's not new. It's not a new movie. I almost hate to call them new movies because they're really not new movies.
Which is why I've been running to overseas, and I've been spending the last two months looking at the 30s and 40s. simply all the things I haven't seen from that time period because they were creating new stories. And generally speaking, that stuff's not being remade. It's the
Right.
70s and 80s stuff, mostly 80s stuff,
Right.
because the big 70s titles have already been remade.
Well, let's go back to the death of physical media here for a moment, if we can. I think the death of physical media is still several years off as far as mainstream stuff. We're not going to see, you know, whatever the next iteration of Halloween is on Blu-ray, most likely. Well, maybe, I don't know. It'll just be on streaming, but we'll still have, I believe, the Scream Factories and the Vinegar Syndromes of the world doing the niche stuff. And really, that's okay with me because that's really the only stuff that I buy. The newer releases I don't need to buy on Blu-ray. I don't feel like I need to buy on Blu-ray.
I think that it's not as simple as anyone, including myself, portrays it. I think what you just said is completely right. And what I think I've been saying is also completely right, because I think things are going to change. The technology is going to have to change. To press discs in the current fashion, to warehouse them and send them out, is not a model that can subsist with a shrinking market the way it is. Retail cannot support it, that's for sure. That's over. Retail is out of the physical media game. This is the last Christmas with physical media in the stores. That's just how it is. Mm-hmm. And then there's enough, company reports to back that up. But I think pressing on demand, I think, is going to be a definite thing. And I think that there's going to have to be a component, whereas if you buy the physical disc, you automatically get the streaming copy, but you also get access to anything that comes up from that title. So if they remaster the title, you get the new version digitally automatically. If they make a special feature, I think special features are no longer going to be on the discs. I think they will be a online component that gets unlocked by the disc. I really think that's going to happen because it makes sense. The market's going to have to change to survive as long as it can. But the market as we know it today is not going to be around. There's a number of problems with the distribution chain. The least of which is not during this shutdown, a lot of the plants that press physical media have stopped and are not going to restart.
Right.
And that's reality. Sony shuttered a couple big ones in the UK, and it looks like they're massively reducing the amount of outside orders they take.
Well, in a lot of companies who create these fancy special editions with the the booklets and the posters and the slipcases and all that jazz, those get made in China.
Yeah.
So
I think it is going to definitely be a different market. Now, if you want to say that maybe we have another 8 years with physical media changed massively, maybe. But we're looking at the next 3 years for the paradigm as we know it at all. And then if it's going to survive, it's going to have to change massively. I'm worried about companies like Vinegar Syndrome who take chances on smaller titles because they are more precarious because, they're small pressings that need to be near sellouts before they start to make any money. And as we saw with Twilight Time, which, yes, their founder died back in January, and that was how they announced themselves as this is the reason we're going under. But it was months, right? It was months. Mm-hmm. I think the combination of the discs being pressed, getting more expensive, the options of how many places will do it, and just the amount of titles that could draw a profit was getting harder for those small companies. The big guys don't want physical media on the market. The big distributors want streaming because all the profit gets kept in-house. Mm-hmm. But the little guys, they're going to find a way for as long as they can. But again, and I am a broken record here, guys, support this stuff. Support it. Buy it. I know I don't have to say it to you, Piz, because you buy a lot. But the days of sleeping on a title, don't do it because everything's going to be limited very shortly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And there's a lot of people out there who are, and I think Vinegar Syndrome is one of those companies, kind of like Anchor Bay back in the day now, where regardless of what the movie is, if Vinegar Syndrome releases it, people are going to buy it. I'm part of a Facebook group that's just like a Vinegar Syndrome fan club, and these people buy everything Vinegar Syndrome. Doesn't matter what it is, they buy it. So I love Vinegar Syndrome. I'm not that, I'm not going to buy everything, but but there's people out there, if kind of like back in the day, if I saw the little clipper ship from Anchor Bay on the spine of a DVD, that was the seal of approval. If I'd never heard of the movie, if Anchor Bay released it, it's got to be good. So, I mean, I think some people are like that with their favorite, whether it be Vinegar Syndrome or Severin or Arrow, Scream Factory, whatever, they're very brand,
Oh yeah, I mean, Blue Underground, you can tell what their titles are. When they buy something, it feels like it belongs in the catalog. It's the difference between Walmart, which would be your major distributors, right? They release whatever's in the pipeline. Walmart, you look at a Walmart shelf, it looks like whatever was available cheaply that day. But you go to a Target, everything looks like it belongs in a Target. And that's kind of the boutique labels. They kind of both do the same thing, but you can walk into the store and see the difference. You can see it with the labels too. Vinegar Syndrome can't put out something like Halloween.
No.
That makes no sense whatsoever. Even if they could afford it, it would not be their marketplace.
No.
But if they were to take something like The Dark from 1993 or The Club from the same year, those titles make complete sense for them.
Or what's that Halloween ripoff movie? Offerings. That's a perfect Vinegar Syndrome release right there.
Right.
And Vinegar Syndrome would give it a 4K restoration, and I mean, it would look fantastic. You know what I mean?
I think that they honestly lost lead beyond sales in a lot of titles. That's why I worry about them. I think the volume used to take care of the problem. Like this title covered that title when they knew they had something that couldn't really do it. But I mean, they can't be putting out like Don Coscarelli student films as part of the 5 films, per decade releases. That's not going to sell. Those days are probably.
Are they releasing those?
One of them already happened years ago. I think it's out of print already. Those 5 films collections are really great things to own because you've never heard of any of the titles. They're not just underground. They were regional releases that didn't get national. Never got VHS in many cases. I mean, they're awesome.
I do like what they're doing though. They're bringing a lot of movies to Blu-ray that never got that treatment, and they're treating them like, they're a big. I mean, Tammy and the T-Rex 4K. Who would have ever thought that would happen? So I mean, I respect them a lot. But I wanted to ask you a question. I mean, you kind of asked me how I got into horror. How did you get into horror, and why is horror your genre? Why is because people have asked me this a lot too, like why do you like horror? What is it about horror? Do you just like watching people get murdered? And
we all like watching people get murdered, but that's not
it. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I mean, a couple desperate memories, right? They're not connected on any surface levels. One was a yard sale. Walking up to the picnic table with a tablecloth, and there was, a toaster, a lamp that probably didn't work anymore and had its plug cut off, and there was paperbacks. And one of those paperbacks was a book called Shadows 3, edited by Charles L. Gren. It was a collection of short stories. Next to that was a copy of a book called The Glow. And next to that was a copy of Stephen King's Night Shift. And they were 25 cents a pop. I had exactly 75 cents in my pocket. That's the first memory. Obviously, all 3 went home. All 3 got read. I was like 10. The next memory was very simple. I saw a trailer on television, I guess an ad really on television for a movie. And it was scary to me. It was disturbing me. I'd seen things on television already, and it was a film called One Dark Night. And I petitioned my parents to go see it. My parents never took us to the movies. And they said, no, but ask your grandmother. So my grandparents lived next door, which is now the house I'm living in. I walked over and said, I want to see this movie. And I brought the newspaper clipping with her. I was addicted already to the entertainment section of the newspaper. I went over and I said, I want to see that movie. She looked at the corner. It said PG. And she said, yeah. So obviously I got to see One Dark Night in the theater. The third memory is a little bit more esoteric and not obvious at all. I used to have a reoccurring nightmare about myself in a tilled cornfield. And the sky was not a regular sky. It was more like a projection screen, or hard to describe exactly. But it had texture to it, and there was images in it. And the images disturbed me greatly. And there was a sound, like a hollow echo, or maybe a really deep voice. And it was telling me to come in further into the field. And I would walk it. As you know, in nightmares, you do exactly what you probably shouldn't.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't tell you much more about it than that. But it was really deeply disturbing to me. And it was something that I could not escape. I would wake up from it and I would be terrified. There was no more sleep that night. And then a weird thing happened with these three things. The book stopped scaring me as much as exhilarating me. I saw more movies, Psycho 2, Friday the 13th Final Chapter, and it was like an incredible experience. I was filled with awe rather than terror. And you know, a weird thing happened. I had that nightmare one last time, and I didn't want it to end. And by age 12, when those three things came together, I was hooked. If you look at my bio that's in all my books, it says I grew up on yellow spine paperbacks, black and white monster movies, and the Thunder Lizard backbeat of rock and roll. That is me. That's what did it.
So what is it about horror, or what is it about when I tell people, when people ask me why, why horror, is it just because you like to watch people get murdered? I say, no, it's because this is a genre. This is one of the only genres that it's the one genre that I can derive the most entertainment value out of. And a good horror movie can make you laugh, can make you cry, can make you scared, can make you uncomfortable, can take you through the entire, it can put you through the ringer. And no other genre can do that, because a lot of genres are so limited to, they're very limited. A horror movie can do anything, can go anywhere, can be about anything, and then sneak in, in the case of Romero, can sneak in social satire. In the case of, whatever film, it can be a movie like Spring, it can be romantic, it can be, a love story. I don't know, I've always just felt like you can do so much with the genre that you can't do in other genres.
Yeah. So every video I put up has my definition of horror that starts it. And there's when I started this channel for real, I made a conscious decision that I didn't want to just, hey, I want to talk to you about how I feel about Halloween 4. Mm. To me, and I'm not picking on anyone else's channel that does that, because I think there's a great value there. There's not a great value there from me, though, because I want to explore what this is. Because I don't completely have the answer when people say, why do you love the genre? All I know is I get a thrill out of it that nothing else gives me. But I've also felt like you have a lot of different emotions that people that don't watch horror films or read horror literature don't normally ascribe to the genre. So I find it interesting that a film like The Lodge, for instance, the overriding emotion that's in The Lodge is grief. Mm-hmm. It's not trying to scare you necessarily, although it might. It's not trying to gross you out, though there's a few scenes that might. No, it's trying to dig deep into that sense of grief, and let's let you explore that. Boot, Ghost Ship, is also about grief. Game Over, one of my more recent favorites, is a film about overcoming trauma and forgiving yourself for whatever mistakes you think you made that led to your trauma. I think the horror genre is in a unique position because it descends directly from the Greek tragedy. The comedy and tragedy used to be all there was, and every other genre has splintered off but has become so codified. The action film, where does it belong? Is it comedy? Is it tragedy? I'd say it's comedy at this point. Mm-hmm. That's not saying they all are, but I'd say in general it is. But the horror genre has never lost that strain from the Greek tragedy, from and Greek tragedy through Shakespeare with things like Titus Andronicus, straight down to the Gothic melodramas, Varney the Vampire, coming through the great literature of Shelley and Machen and Stoker. And we got to where we are today. We're not really in that big a different place. So there's still a primacy there. And that's why I think you can do so much, because it hasn't lost its way and become so codified. Individual subgenres have. The slasher is the slasher. The giallo is the giallo. The traditional, kaiju film. But these all exist side by side. We're in a genre where you can look at something like The Innocents, which is based on Turn of the Screw, and can sit side by side by Cannibal Ferox, and there's no problem. There's no discrepancy there. But the films have nothing in common other than they attract those same range of emotions. I'm sorry, I just soapboxed like all hell there. So, I mean, is there a film in the genre that would surprise people to hear that you're a big fan of?
I don't think so. I think I've been pretty open about. I like to say that I have no guilty pleasures, because if I like a movie, I don't feel guilty about it. I don't think there's one in the genre that people would be surprised that I like. I think most people who follow my channel probably know exactly everything that I like, and they probably would not be surprised. I think if I came out and I gave like the Black Christmas remake a good review, they'd probably been like, "Oh my god, he's lost it."
But if you liked it, I'd want to hear that from you.
But if I genuinely liked it, yeah, like I went into a movie. What was the movie? Oh, I went and I rewatched. I went and I rewatched The Prowler the other day, because in my mind, all I can, The Prowler is all about the effects. It's all about Tom Savini as the star of that movie, period. His effects are the star of that movie. But I wanted to go back and rewatch it to be like, well, maybe there's something, let's look at the characters here. Let's look at the dialogue. Maybe there's something that, I can latch on to. But there really wasn't. I mean, that was Tom Savini's movie. You know what I mean? That was Tom Savini's movie. It's a well-made film. It's a great looking movie. But as far as the characters and the dialogue, you know what I mean? It was Tom Savini's movie.
Rosemary's Killer, aka The Prowler, is a dry run for Friday the 13th, the final chapter. Exactly. That's all it is. I mean, it doesn't have anything more to offer than that. And I that's an opinion. Someone in the chat is going to say, I love The Prowler. Great. I'm very happy you do. I try to, and you and I both fail at this sometimes, but hey, we're human. When I give my strong opinion about a film, sometimes it sounds like I'm trying to be the voice of God. And please understand, everyone, I want you guys to disagree, because that means it's a better world. Mm-hmm. And it also means we'll get different stuff coming out that you'll love and I'll love, and maybe I won't love, but you'll love. But the reality is, like, when I look back at a lot of things that I loved when I was young, my feelings have changed on a lot of things. I don't blindly love anything, but I'll tell you this, I love the genre. Mm-hmm. So if you ask me, would I prefer Grudge 2020 to exist or not exist? My answer every time is going to be like, I never want to see it again, but I'm glad it exists. Because, for instance, Andrew from Hayes and That Devon Graham show in the Firefly Family podcast, he loves at least he liked the film. Mm. You know what? That's awesome. He can have my share of it, make no mistake. I don't want it. But I think we're healthier when there is this kind of democracy out there.
Yeah. Yeah. Dave, I think the one thing that I admitted to really and really liking, that I was kind of concerned as to whether or not my viewers would kind of jibe with it or not, was Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
The movie?
Well, I love the movie and I love the series too, but mostly I'm talking about the television series. How much I loved it. And I actually, when it first aired, I watched it up to a certain season and I liked it, and then I tuned out. But then I rediscovered the show during a sort of a dark period of my life, and the show really helped me through that dark period of my life. So, I mean, I was like, I don't know how people will, what people will say if, me talking about how much I love Buffy the Vampire Slayer. And I found out that most everybody also really likes Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and that there were other people like, yeah, that show helped get me through a really dark time too. So that's really the only one that I can recall, because I was thinking, like, if I mention this, I don't know what people will think, or but I mean, it's I'm being honest here. So I've never shied away from giving my honest opinion, even if it's not the popular opinion.
Me either. I think we both know that you and I probably have the strongest opinions on the former sausage factory. I think that we one of the reasons that we've clashed at times, although always with respect, is that we do have strong opinions. I've never seen enough Buffy the Vampire Slayer to actually give an opinion, because I don't do a lot of television. But you saying that is just, to me, that's heartwarming, because it means the genre is working. For myself, when I was growing up, I didn't have a lot of friends. It wasn't like I wanted to try and change myself ever to get a lot of friends. I think that was a lot of it, to be honest. I kind of have the kind of personality, whereas if you're not going to be part of my circle, I don't need you to be part of my circle. And the circle was a small circle. But every summer, I could watch certain shows, and I didn't care about the shows at all. They'd be shows like, UHF's reruns of old horror films, or professional wrestling, or hockey. For some reason, freaking hockey. Well, I guess it makes sense. And there would be an advertisement for that year's Friday the 13th. And in a way, seeing that new Friday the 13th, even if I couldn't get to the theater to see it, but knowing it was out there, it was a sort of continuity in my life. It meant there was more people out there like me, because they were making these movies for someone. Jason Voorhees, in a way, was one of my greatest friends as growing up, because I could rely on him. He didn't stay away for very long. And then when the video revolution really came to my house, which it came a little later than for a lot of people, and I didn't have cable, he was a constant. I could always, if I had a hard day, pop in Final Chapter, pop in Jason Lives, and I was good.
Well, that I echo that sentiment with USA Up All Night. Part of the reason why I loved USA Up All Night so much was I could not wait to get home on Friday afternoon after school, because I knew that that whole weekend really was going to be just Friday the 13th and USA Up All Night. So I mean, it was I remember just giddy, practically skipping off the bus and down the street to the house, because I knew it was going to be, Friday the 13th all weekend on USA Up All Night. And I think I've told this story, but whenever I hear The Darkest Side of the Night from Part 8, it just brings back all these bittersweet memories of, being that kid at home and realizing that, if I'm hearing this song on Sunday afternoon, that means Friday the 13th is over, the weekend is over, and tomorrow I'm right back in school. So it's just like, even today I hear that song and I'm taken back there.
I have such weird feelings about Friday 8. It's really low on my list of the Fridays, really low on my list. But it reminds me of a simpler time in my life. When I first saw it, I loved it. And I mean, I guess as I became, who I am today, and writing and learning structure, the film has way too many problems for me to overlook. But the interesting thing is, I still kind of feel that same warmth towards it. And you know what? That's not a fault. That's a feature.
Yeah, I agree. I look at 7 and 8 the same way. I mean, they're both very flawed movies, but I just have such a warmth toward them, because Part 7 was the first one I ever saw, and Part 8, because of it, it was always the closer on that weekend. So they're lower on my list, but I mean, that doesn't mean I don't love them.
So when I was talking to Jamie earlier, well, last week, I guess at this point, I don't even know what day it is. We talked about Friday the 13th being kind of the gateway drug movie.
Right.
The original film. I mean, and it's amazing the amount of people you talk to. And at least one of the Fridays was a film that really kicked fandom into gear for them. Was that true for you?
I was already a horror fan before I saw my first Friday the 13th, but the big franchises were off limits. I couldn't watch any of the big franchises. If I wanted to rent a movie, I had to take the box to my mother for her perusal. And she'd flip it around to make sure, you know what I mean? Like, you know, she'd look at the back of it to make sure there's not, like, you know, naked women, you know, being beheaded on the back of the box. And there were certain things I could rent, and there were certain things I couldn't rent. So I was already a horror fan by the time I saw my first Friday the 13th. But that was the gateway drug for sure, because that I was finally able to see it. It was part 7. That meant, you know, all bets are off. The floodgates are open. All the Friday the 13th, all the Nightmare on Elm Streets, all the Halloweens, everything was just there. That was at the point where, like I said in the beginning, I was just awash. There was no digging required. It was all right there. So it wasn't my introduction to the genre. I was already a horror fan, but it certainly was. It blew open the doors to so much.
And I find it remarkable that these films that at the time they came out were thought of as bottom of the barrel. They were studio embarrassments.
Right.
But it's today they are small economies unto themselves.
Well, let me ask you this. This is something that I find really interesting. You know, the Nightmare series outshined Friday the 13th in the 80s without question. Made more money. They were more, you know, recognized in the pop culture. Today, however, Friday the 13th is a million times more popular. The Nightmare on Elm Street series is really gone into the shadows, and Friday the 13th has really overtaken really all the series. It's the most popular, and we've not had a Friday movie in forever. So, I mean, what is it about that series that's had such you can almost look at those, like we said with Halloween 3, you know, they've become more popular over the years.
So I think it has more to do with Nightmare on Elm Street than it does with Friday. Friday was the reliable workhorse. It was always there for us. We built up these great memories. And the weird thing is, you look back at those films and they haven't aged as badly as any of their contemporaries. Mm-hmm. They really haven't. Mm-hmm. People always talk, oh, well, yeah, they're very 80s. Are they? I don't think the first 4 films are. No. I think you could set that first 4 films in 72 without a problem. Mm-hmm. Or 94. I don't think there's a problem. Some of the later sequels in the Paramount era, I can see more of it. I mean, JJ from Manhattan is pretty 80s.
7 and 8 are very, they do feel kind of dated. Yeah.
Yeah. But they're the weaker films anyway.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So, but Nightmare on Elm Street had a different thing going, which is that, especially for this, here's my caveat to this. If you didn't experience the 80s firsthand, your mileage is going to vary on what I'm about to say. And that's okay. I'm not trying to be superior because I lived through it. Believe me, we're just old. But Nightmare on Elm Street was very much driven by the times. So if you look at those movies, you can tell the exact moment that hair metal hit. You can tell the exact moment that, you know, MASH went off the air and Cheers became a global sensation. You can feel the social mores change, and they were a film series that rode the popularity wave. Freddy was on television commercials that had a 1-900 number. There was video games, and there was for Friday too, but it was different. There wasn't. It was a much more commercial property, and it was exploited a whole lot more. But it was because it had this kind of MTV friendliness to it. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And unfortunately, if you look at when both series collapsed, you know, Nightmare basically killed Friday the 13th. That's basically what happened. They both came out the same summer, and they both, you know, for 8 and for 5, and they both failed. And what happened is Nightmare could pick itself up and dust itself off because it had made so much money. Friday couldn't. But it was because, like, we were still in that mode that you know, Dokken on the soundtrack of Nightmare on Elm Street, because Dokken what was big, whereas Friday the 13th was sitting there saying, "How about Alice Cooper?"
Yeah.
You know, who hadn't had Poison was still many years off at that point. Mm-hmm. But his last big hit was what?
It was a long time before Part 6.
1979 with You and Me. I mean, so it's like Friday was going for something not as of the moment Elements of 8 try, but kind of half-heartedly. But Nightmare was very much a part of that generation. Then when we hit the early 90s, the social mores change. And you see it happen in music as Nirvana destroys the legacy of Warrant.
Mm-hmm.
And Nightmare on Elm Street had nowhere to go then. They hit a brick wall with the 6th film because everything changed. And Friday then was resurrected, as it were. And it resurrected. It's interesting that we didn't get a Freddy film until New Nightmare, which was basically the dry run for the Scream series. Mm. You know, it's interesting that and New Nightmare was not terribly successful either, by the way. Mm. So it's interesting that like if you the choice to ride the wave really backfired. Not in the 80s, it didn't. Oh God, no. But as for longevity, for legacy, Friday had it right. They played the slow game. It was Tortoise in the Hare, and guess what? Tortoise is still walking, even though they haven't had a film in 11 years.
Yeah.
But you release an action figure of Jason and Freddy same day. The Jason will sell out. The Freddy will not.
No, of course. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I wanted to ask you about writing too.
Don't do it.
I think that's no. I think that's interesting. What I know you said you loved the horror novels. At what point did you decide you wanted to pick up pen and paper or load up the word processor and start writing yourself?
Well, it was a typewriter. It was definitely a typewriter. I saved up for the word processor. So when I was young, I don't know exactly how old my sister and I were. We lived very rural. So there weren't many kids around our age that we were going to play with. So we played with each other a lot. And my sister was kind of in charge of figuring out the day's activities during summer. So I had to have been really young. We're probably talking 6 or 7, something like that. And she was reading, she's a few years older than I, so she was already reading. And she decided one day that we were going to write. That's what we were going to do. And she wrote this thing she called Footsteps. And it was just this, it wasn't even really a short story by today's standards. It would be like one sheet of paper, but it was a story about a girl being followed home by someone who she looked back and she could never see, but she could hear the footsteps. And I don't remember if it ever resolved itself. I think she probably got to a point and said, I'm done. Mm-hmm. And I wrote like 2 lines and they made no sense and they had horrible spelling and they were run-on sentences. But I looked at what she did and I was like spellbound. Like, this is something that didn't exist, a story that didn't exist before she put it on paper, and now it exists. And that was magical to me. That the entire idea that you could create something and you didn't need anything else. Like, it's different. Like, I couldn't make a movie in 1978, 1982, whenever it was that this happened. But I could pick up a pen. I could roll the paper through the typewriter and start clicking keys. And I could create something. So that was the earliest side of it. But then it was just really reading those Charles L. Grant anthologies, reading the early Stephen King anthologies, and then taking on the novels like The Glow, which is a potboiler. It's not a great novel, but I have great memories of it. And then things like Twins by Barry Wood, which eventually would be loosely translated into a David Cronenberg film. These were like novels that took me places that I couldn't go, and without the prying eyes of my parents. Because like you, if I walked up with a copy of House by the Cemetery, they'd say, no. Yeah. They might be willing to rent some R-rated films from me, but it wasn't going to be that. But if it was a book, they didn't care. He's reading? Awesome. Doesn't matter. And the covers were more sedate anyway. Even the garish ones weren't, blood and guts. Mm-hmm. So it was a situation where fiction became a big place I could go and hide and kind of feed my growing desire for horror. And it was only natural from the earlier experiences that at some point I said, I want to write. So I wrote what I was thinking was going to be a novel, ended up to be a 12-page story about a hitman who was actually a werewolf. It was called The Hitter. It no longer exists, and it was, I'm sure, unreadable. But that was the level of my intellect at the time. Hey, a guy who kills someone, wouldn't you want to be a werewolf? And then, but honestly, for many years, I talked about wanting to write, produced very little, like most people, I think, do. And then I found myself out of work at one point, over a decade ago. And I said, I've been talking about this thing forever, that I want to be a writer. I call myself a writer, but I don't really write. I don't even really know what I'm doing, to be honest. And that took a lot to just acknowledge that I didn't know what I was doing. So I said, you know what? I got the time now. Either I do it or I'm going to stop talking about it. And I sat down and I started writing every day. And I started, as I read, paying attention to how things were done, which might have hurt my enjoyment of those novels, but I learned so much. People like Dennis Etchison and David Shaw, they taught me. They were my teachers. They didn't know it, but they taught me. And then it was amazing. Within 6 months of doing that, I started selling short stories to anthologies. Within a year, I was appearing in print with my heroes in some of those anthologies. That was mind-blowing. Within 2 years, I had a publisher say, yes, we want your work. We will publish this book. And it was just from the hard work. It was sitting down and doing it. So that's really what happened. But it all started because my sister probably didn't want to play hide and seek that day.
How much did you have to write before you felt like you found your voice?
Again, about 6 months worth of writing every day. Back then, I was probably only producing 250 to 400 words a day. Now I do a grand every day. That doesn't mean that they're finished word counts, because you always go back and revise endlessly. But I don't do traditional drafts. So I actually start with what I wrote yesterday, look it over, fix what I need, and go. And then I do passes when a manuscript is complete, and then go through the editing process where I get beat up. So it all works.
See, Stephen King says, don't stop, don't go back, finish it, put it in the desk, give it time, then go back and cut it in half. Or I think he said take out a third of it.
Which means he's writing 5,000 word novels, 5,000 page novels. Yeah, no, I couldn't do that because I can't look at a draft and know I have to revise every page massively. I have to get it right. No one out there cares about my process, but I don't write until I know. So I don't even start a chapter until I have the chapter in my head, right down to how the pacing, how the flow, certain wording of certain passages, how do you do certain things. Things I struggle with that I know I need to get better at, things like having a conversation between more than two people. There's a specific way to write that, and I struggled with that. So I don't write and learn writing. I think it through, then I have it, then I write it, discover I was wrong, and rewrite it then. But it's a process for me. But I don't think King has the answer to any one thing. It works great for him. I'll never be Stephen King. I'll never release a book a year. Won't happen.
Do you outline, or do you just keep it all up in your head?
Well, I mean, I don't want this stream to just become about my writing, but I'll say this. So my process is very much that I put things in my head. If they work, they'll stay there. If they don't, I'll forget them. And that's my siphon. So when I'm even at the earliest stages of coming up with ideas for a book, which I get book ideas all the time. I go to the supermarket, I come out with 10. But by the time I'm going home, there might be one left. That's the keeper. Mm-hmm. And if it's still with me 10 days later, even more so a keeper. If it's with me by the time I'm ready to put something together, it's a good idea. Because I'm critical of myself. It's like, yeah, that felt real good in that moment, but it sucks, let's be honest. Mm-hmm. And I wish kind of that movies would get back to that kind of approach, because I look at some films and I see these plot holes, and I just say, how did that ever get that far? How did that get that far? And these are well-respected big movies in some cases. And it's like, as much as people might love those movies, it's like, could you just fix the obvious frickin' mistake? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So...
well, I like your writing. I think you have a very distinctive voice that I like, and I think it's pretty impressive that it only took you 6 months to kind of hone that. So, I mean, I think that's pretty impressive.
I would say that the voice has evolved, though. I think the voice at 6 months in was saleable. I'd like to think I'm better today, but I guess that's everyone's opinion. I want to say thank you to Andrew Morris for saying he loved December. I really appreciate that, dude.
Can you make a living at writing today and not be Stephen King level?
Simple answer to that is no. So publishing has gone through much what all physical media has gone through. It has gone through a constriction that has made it that it's very, very, very tough for the publishers to make any money off anyone who's not a celebrity memoir or a Stephen King or a Michael Crichton level success. There's people in like the romance field that have gotten their, stable readers, but in general, new writers have a really tough time breaking through because there just isn't an audience large enough for enough people to be taking chances. So I had one good year of writing, whereas I did pretty well. It was when The Lifeless came out in 2010. And that was the last time I made any serious money off of writing. And when I say serious money, people, I'm not going to go into numbers, but people would have to understand that it wasn't like quit your job numbers. Mm-hmm. It was just, hey, this year is going to be the best financial year of my life. Still very middle class, mm-hmm. for 1 year. And then, but I feel like all entertainment is in that boat right now. I feel like all entertainment is in that boat right now, to be honest with you. I mean, musicians can't make a living off of, music sales anymore. They either have to tour or they have to license their music to everything on earth. And that's why we're not seeing the superstar music artists come out outside of, the people that are pushed by the entertainment media. You don't make it because you have a great song. You make it because you are on TMZ.
Mm. So in other words, you need to get on TMZ.
So I need to commit a crime to get on TMZ. Yes.
You need to become what's one of those Jenners? Become one of the Jenners stalker. Get on TMZ.
Could I just rename myself like Jenner or Kardashian and pull that off?
Sure. Yeah. Lauren Kardashian.
So in the chat, a lot of people are saying right now that they don't read or don't read as much as they should. What I'm going to say to everyone out there is this: do yourself a favor and just pick something up, because I think we all have this idea from high school of what reading is all about, and we do a big disservice to people, to the kids, by giving them the worst, most unrelatable classics imaginable. And it really is not the same experience when you pick up something by a Kathy Koja or a Brian Hodge or a Gary Razor or Paul Trebley. These are completely different experiences. And it's the difference between watching, a film adaptation of War and Peace and watching the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Do yourself a favor and just try.
That's right. Phantoms, Dean Koontz.
Better book than film. I'll give him that.
I love that movie too. Or American Psycho. American Psycho was the book that did it for me. That was the first book that I really read, because I had buddies like push the Catcher in the Rye on me, and I was just like, God, this guy's so whiny. I don't know. I can't connect with this Caulfield guy. But I connected with Patrick Bateman. I don't know what it was. I connected with Patrick Bateman.
See, I like the film version of American Psycho more than Ellis's novel. And that's, I think, intentional on Ellis's part. I think he made a book that you should like despite the book. I mean, there's long passages about brand names and, about professional cards. And it's intentionally dense in all the wrong places. But then I saw the film and I was like, oh, this contextualizes everything in the book so perfectly. Now, what's interesting about him as an artist is everything he wrote after that isn't like that.
Yeah.
So,
it's interesting, because I think I went from that to like Less Than Zero, and Less Than Zero is as minimalistic as you can get, pretty much. So,
yeah, and there's a case where I'd say the film failed to capture the novel. Yeah, it's okay on its own, but it's not that novel.
Yeah, I think Ellis feels the same way about that one.
Yeah. So, to get back to our more comfortable subject matter, do you think there's a single movement, say A24 or even what Hammer is doing, that could really reset the genre, or do you think it's going to go on this path for a while?
Well, I mean, I'm really excited for whatever A24 puts out, because I've liked every A24 film except for really one. Um, and if Hammer keeps down this trek of movies like The Lodge, I mean, yeah. And there's other companies out there. There's Spectravision. There's what was the company that released VFW?
I know who you mean.
It's the company where the guy they let him go because he was a whatever.
Mhm.
Yeah, I can't think of the name of that company, but I know they've got some other movies in the works that are gonna maybe be good. So I don't know. I'm looking to them far more with hope and anticipation than Bloomhouse or whatever else is out there today. Making horror.
Well, I think that in itself was a problem. When all the studios decided they needed their shingle to put out their horror brands, and there was a lot in cases like Blumhouse, they were an outside production company, but they'd signed distribution deals for many years with them. But in other cases, like Sony actually owned a good deal of Ghost House as a partnership with Raimi and Tappert. I think that was a big mistake for the genre because rather than that independent spirit of the negative pickup, whereas you made a film, it was really good. The studio said, I need Candyman, or I need Friday the 13th, or I need whatever it was. You got a situation whereas now there was just something always in the pipeline. And I think that if you look back to the 90s when things got kind of tough, I think it was a direct result of like everyone thinking that a shingle was the idea.
Mm-hmm. Well, and wasn't it like Dimension that kind of laid that groundwork? Everybody saw what Miramax did with Dimension. They're like, oh, we need our Dimension.
Yep. Yep. Now, you recently did a watch along of Scream, a film that I think is merely okay, and I think the sequels are awful. But you actually came out with I think, a fresh appreciation of the film, which I was surprised at.
I don't know if I would say a fresh appreciation. I felt like it held up for the most part with me. Some of the dialogue was very of that era, trendy, self-aware horror.
Gilmore Girls.
Something like that, yeah. And there's parts of it that I think you mentioned that it feels stagey. There's parts of it that feel kind of stagey, but overall I think it's still a really good slasher movie that it doesn't make fun of Friday the 13th or all of these. It I don't know, it really it held up for me. The sequels I'm not a fan of, but I felt like the first one held up for me.
So let me ask this. Was it worth it? So in other words, we had years of retreads off of Scream. And it got us through a dark period in horror. There's no question about that. But it also left a certain legacy that had to be overcome by the torture porn and stuff.
Well, to me, it feels like the legacy of Scream was very short-lived because it felt like within a couple of years after Scream's release, it was already kind of dead. The momentum that Scream had started had already gone away because we got I Know What You Did Last Summer and we got Urban Legend, and they were both okay. And then we got all the knockoffs, and then we got the sequels to those films that weren't that great. And then it seemed like within just really a very short window, it was over. I mean, Scream, kickstarted the genre, and a couple of years later, it was already done. The wave broke, and it was over. But yeah, I mean, we got so many of those, and a lot of them were these straight to video movies that were luckily you could easily identify them as a Scream ripoff because they all had the same Photoshop looking floating head, Scream looking artwork on them. So I was not a big fan of torture porn. I definitely think torture porn was sort of the answer to the trendy slasher stuff. They wanted to make it, dirtier and dingier and more hardcore. And then that kind of took off and became its own, I don't know. I'm not a fan of torture porn at all.
I think that it's interesting because there's always been what we're calling torture porn as a part of horror. I mean, going back to Edgar Allan Poe, and probably before that, but we just don't have a great recorded history of it.
Mm.
But it's interesting that, like, if you look at something like Witch Hunter General or Mark of the Devil, they were definitely torture porn films, and those are in the 60s. So I think that to a degree, the wave was simply recalculating back to something that existed before. The problem was the audience kind of glommed onto the wrong aspects. Like for myself, I like the Saw series, but what I like about the Saw series aren't the traps. I could take or leave any of the traps whatsoever. And as the series goes on, I wish they'd abandon the traps entirely. I love the idea of a bunch of serial killers trying to outdo each other and get the crown of the serial killer that inspired them. That's a great series concept.
Mm.
But unfortunately, the commercial aspect of the traps had to be present.
Yeah.
But I think overall, though, what it did is it reset the genre to a place whereas the fan base didn't have to be Abercrombie and Finch, shoppers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's an interesting point because I never heard anybody talking about the plot or the characters from those films. It was always like, oh man, this guy had a thing on his head and it ripped his face open, and oh my god, she had to gut this guy to get a key out before it ripped her face open, and it's like, that sounds awesome. I don't know. That movement just was not for me, and it became so repetitious, and I don't know. It just was not for me.
The problem with Hostel isn't Hostel; it's Turistas.
I didn't even waste my time with Turistas.
Yeah, it's just when you can look at the good version of something, as shallow as it might be, but when it inspires the bad, you have a problem. And Scream had the same problem.
Right.
I don't have a high opinion of the original Scream, but I'd be a fool if I didn't recognize that it's better than that second urban legend film. Mm-hmm. Different leagues.
And I recall liking the first Saw movie because the first Saw movie was like a detective story. It wasn't, the traps and whatever wasn't the focus of the film. And I liked it because of that. But then it seemed like all the other films, it was just all about the traps.
I would say the second film is very similar to the first film in that it's very story driven. But yeah, starting with the third film, the traps are everything. Mm-hmm. And the third film has a big epic feel to it. So as a trilogy, it's fine. But as the series goes on, I wish the traps weren't present. And I know that's a weird thing because it's their most iconic part of the series. But the strength of the series really is these characters that they're all bad guys on one level or another. But you tend to start rooting for your bad guy of choice. And I think that's kind of fascinating.
Well, and of all of these reboots or whatever that we've got coming out, the Candyman and the new Halloween and whatever, Saw was the new Saw was the only one that I was kind of like, okay, so they're kind of taking it back to the first film. This looks like the detective story, so this could be interesting. So
Christian just said in the chat, Scream is the most pretty good movie ever made. I think that's where I stand. I really do. And I don't think there's anything bad about that. Again, I would rather Scream exist. I'd even rather the Scream sequels exist than not exist. But again, when I look at the greats from the genre, Scream just starts withering down the list. And it finds its home safely at a C. But I mean, if you start looking at your Night of the Living Deads and your Texas Chainsaw Massacres and your Friday the 13th Final Chapters, Scream just is not in that A and B category.
The Scream and I don't, Christian was Christian alive in '96? I don't know, but
just maybe.
You've got horror was very, very dead, especially slasher movies. And you can't really, it's hard to describe what that film did for the entire genre to bring it back into the mainstream and to make it. I mean, that movie crossed over into pop culture. That's the last horror movie that I can think of that really crossed over into pop culture. We've had horror movies that have been big hits, but they didn't cross over the same way Scream did.
Maybe Blair Witch.
Yeah, well, Blair Witch was what was that? 90?
I think it was 2000 or 99. It was 99.
99, yeah. And that was after Scream. And maybe a big part of the reason that Blair Witch was as monstrous as it was because of Scream. I don't know, but um, I talked about this in my commentary the other day. Just a year before Scream came out, I was having a conversation with one of my buddies about Halloween 6. And he looked at me with this just disgusted look on his face, and he said, "You don't really like those movies, do you? I mean, they all suck, right?" After Scream, loved horror. All about Scream, all about horror movies, all about, oh, well, if Halloween inspired Scream, I want to watch Halloween. He was a huge, huge horror fan after Scream. And that's what Scream did for so many people. And Scream was such a kickstart for the horror genre.
And that's actually a really, really important point in the widest possible sense, is that we have such bad perception as horror fans. We have no idea how little people know of this genre. If you're a normie, if you're someone who doesn't watch horror films, you don't know the difference between your Michaels and your Freddys and your Jasons and your Leatherfaces. You probably are not aware they made more than one Carrie. We to us, it's second nature. But to the average film goer who might see one horror movie every 3 years, they have no idea about any of this stuff. And so it takes a Scream to bring them into the tent. But what's remarkable, and I get this with fiction all the time, I don't read horror because I don't like blood and guts. You know how little blood and guts was in horror novels as a movement? But yet you start talking them down. Hey, so did you ever read Scott Smith's The Ruins? Oh yeah, that was great. That's horror, right? You ever read Thomas Harris? That's horror. You realize that, right? And so it's the same thing. But they need those points of entry. Those films that they can penetrate safely.
Yeah.
And so we need those films. And I never want to come off as the purist that just wants the most hardcore of the hardcore. Give me a Serbian film every day, because that would be completely false to what I believe. I think that even the Friday the 13th series is an extremely commercial series. This is not underground filmmaking. It just is. The reality is that more people have probably seen any given Friday the 13th chapter than will ever see Reanimator.
Right.
And there's a reason for that, So what's your big hope for the future of the genre? What do you hope it looks like in 10 years?
That's a good question. I don't know. I mean, really, I don't know if a whole lot will change. It seems like there's at least one or two horror movies every decade that are sort of the defining movies of that decade. I mean, we've been, Scream and Blair Witch were sort of the defining films of the 90s. So I don't know. I want there to be another movie that does for horror what Scream did, but be a movie that, is fresh and not a you're not going to find that with a reboot, I don't think, or a remake, or even a sequel. It's just not going to happen. It's got to be a fresh idea, and fresh ideas are just like, they're like a virus. They don't want to be anywhere near a fresh idea, because maybe it'll be a hit, maybe it won't. But I don't know. I want to see. I hope that A24 and Hammer and these companies continue to make movies that challenge the audience, and then I'm okay with Blumhouse doing what they're going to do, and all these other companies doing what they're going to do, and have their main, their more mainstream theatrical releases that do okay, and then they can say, well, the horror genre is thriving, blah blah blah. But companies like Hammer and A24 to do the movies that challenge us as horror fans, and the new ideas and the fresh takes, and companies that aren't afraid to take risks, and companies that aren't afraid to shock and upset audiences. That's what I hope. I mean, the horror genre is not going anywhere. It'll ebb, it'll flow, it'll have its ups, it'll have its downs, but it'll always be there. And I just hope that there's good movies happening. I guess I don't know. Just give me a handful of good movies every year, and I'll be fine.
So let me ask you about something you just said, and then I want to kind of riff on something Christian started a conversation, which other people in the chat are going off on. But I question whether, I know that you and I want to be challenged and disturbed and made uncomfortable by films, but increasingly I tend to think that the horror audience, let alone the mainstream, kind of wants comfort food. They want safe. And I think safe is bad in general for the genre. It's never been particularly good for the genre. We need the Frankensteins and the Exorcists and the Halloweens, films that take people where they don't necessarily want to go, to create that next level of, a survivable genre. Do you think that people that there's enough of a market for the truly disturbing?
I think there is. Yes, I mean, I think there is. And let me say this. A movie like It Chapter 1, which was super mainstream, made a ton of money. I thought it was great. I loved that movie. I genuinely loved that movie. Make more, make movies like that all day, every day. That's fine. That make money, that are, that make audiences happy, and, that are accessible horror. And there's plenty of room to make accessible horror like It Chapter 1, as long as it's done well. And there's plenty of room to do movies like The Lodge that are not as accessible, but movies that, I think we need in the genre to keep the blood flowing in the genre.
So Christian asks, he's crying out for a new horror icon. And I don't know how I feel about that. In a way, I think maybe we should go beyond the years of the icon and get back to stories and ideas. But maybe we can tell new stories and ideas with a new icon. So I'm not discounting it. I really need to think more about it anyway. But what's your feelings on that? Do we need a new horror icon, or can we do something new with the old, or do we not need icons at all?
Well, I think there will always be a place for the icons. Again, I mean, like they did with It Chapter 1, Pennywise is an icon. Just make a good movie around that icon. So yes, whenever the rights clear up with Friday the 13th, make a good Friday the 13th movie around Jason. That doesn't involve a backstory, that doesn't involve an origin story. That's just a Friday the 13th story with Jason. Just make sure it's good. And I'll be perfectly fine with that. The thing when people try to create new icons today, they're just riffing on the old icons. They're not trying to do anything. They're not trying to do anything new or fresh. I mean, who is Victor Crowley's just Jason Voorhees. What's this clowny killer? What's his name? Terrifier. I mean, he's part Freddy. He's part,
He's Freddy. Yep.
If you're going to create a new icon, he can't be just a carbon copy of Jason or Freddy. You've got to do something new and different with the icons, or with an icon, or an icon in the, on the come up, so to speak.
And in some ways, not to defend a very unpopular quote, that's what I think Cunningham was talking about when he said, get the frigging mask off of Jason Voorhees. I think the age of the icon as a codified figure, like, it's a tall guy, muscular with a mask. We have those icons. They exist. Maybe we need something different. I think there's a lot of truth to that. So I think that when we get that next icon, legitimate icon, it's going to be very, very different than what's come before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But again, I mean, you can you can have the old icons, and I'm perfectly fine with the old icons coming back. Just make good stories around them. You know what I mean? Um,
I do.
and that would be perfectly fine with me. Perfectly fine with me.
How about we go through the last 60 years of great horror fiction that's never been adapted and start there?
Sure.
I think that's a recipe for success all around.
Yeah.
The stories are already there. The characters are already there. It's all waiting to be mined. Let's have some. I mean, Richard Matheson has been adapted, but not everything has. Shirley Jackson has been adapted, but not everything from her has.
Mhm.
We not Peter Straub has only been adapted, you know, a handful of times. Let's get these people, and not those are talking about older historical authors. There's also modern horror authors who would benefit greatly from adaptations
Mhm.
and have a lot to give.
Has Bentley Little ever been adapted?
Not to the big screen, I don't believe. I think it
Mm.
wasn't a short story part of the Masters of Horror.
Oh yeah, I think you're right. I think you're right.
But I mean, like, there is a lot of talented storytelling out there, and I think Hollywood needs to realign themselves with storytellers, not screenwriters necessarily. I'm not meaning to degrade screenwriting, but for this genre in particular, to not mine the gold mine that's already, it's just waiting to be plucked is just insane to me.
Mhm.
To try and get more life out of Freddy or Jason or Michael, or to introduce a new tall man, which I don't want to break any news here, but there's a lot of rumblings that is happening very shortly. I don't know. I don't see a value in it. I don't think we're ever going to get the glory days that we want.
No, no.
But yet, you know, Thomas Tyrone, great work, ready to be mined.
Yeah.
It's not crazy.
I mean, and speaking of, the Andy Muschietti who did it has been talking about a Howling remake or reboot and a Near Dark remake or reboot, and I'm like, okay, but it seems like it seems so limiting. If you're a good filmmaker, do you not have any fresh ideas? Do you just want to go and take these old ideas and then add a spin to them, or update them or whatever? I mean, I don't know.
I don't know either. I really don't. And I think that the problem with going down the road we've been going is that at a certain point, if you and I are having this conversation about being kind of bored with the big announcements that come across the table,
Mm,
that means we're out of the genre in 10 years if something doesn't change.
yeah.
That's reality. You won't stay as passionate about a genre if you've been watching the same films on repeat for 10 years. At best, it becomes a background noise in your life.
Mm,
And the ultra fans are necessary. We are very necessary. The people in the chat right now are all people who spend, if they have $10 and a movie's coming out that they particularly want to see, they'll spend that $10 and skip lunch. The genre needs these people, but we can't treat them like crap and just give them recycled goods forever. At a certain point, there has to be new and exciting and fresh.
and right now, where the new and exciting and fresh is with the A24s and the Hammers and the Spectravisions, but those require some digging, or those require waiting until they, if you don't have a theater that will run them in their limited runs, you're waiting for VOD, or you know
Yeah. And that's, again, it's a bad world when you're talking about going to things that ultimately are pretty much premiering on video. And I'm talking about looking overseas. Hollywood is missing the point. It's like this is like us, rather than going to our grocery store, going to the ethnic food markets to get the good stuff. The grocery stores at some point have to pay attention and say, you know what, it can't just be canned vegetables all the time.
mm,
We got to open the live bar, and we have to have a deli station for fresh meat, right? It's kind of pathetic that we're even having the conversation. To me, you know, if you look at the 70s, which I think is, in the modern era, the best decade for horror. I don't think it's really even debatable ultimately when you say Jaws, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Halloween, Carrie. I mean, Rosemary's 69, right? But it's a decade where a huge amount of greatness came out. and all of them are so distinct and forceful. Like, these films forced their way into the public consciousness. The Exorcist did not passively grow a following. It appeared one day and said, okay, things changed because I'm here. We need that again. And I don't think we're getting that with Candyman 2020. I don't think we're getting that with Halloween Kills. Halloween Kills is going to make a lot of people very happy, and it's going to make a lot of people very disappointed. That's not a prediction. That's how every film in these long-running franchises goes. Every single one of them. I don't need a crystal ball. I don't need to have read a synopsis. All I need to know is that when we get that next big thing, it's coming out of left field, because that's where it's always come from.
Yeah.
All right. So, Piz, start to think of your parting words to the audience. I'm going to talk for a moment about what's coming up on the channel, and on the other side, you can give your final thoughts. It can be about absolutely anything, no restriction. So, guys, we will be back on Thursday, the 28th at 8 p.m. and with a very special guest, one that I think is going to be very exciting for a lot of people. It might be someone whose work you've never actually enjoyed, but you've certainly been hearing about her work on my channel, at least, for a little while. So I'll be joined by Kathy Koja at 8 o'clock on Thursday. We'll have a wide-ranging discussion talking about her involvement in the last 30 years of the horror genre. Also, we'll go outside that. She's worked in other fields that are going to be equally adjacent to the genre and interesting. She has a lot to say. She's a great person. And I really feel like at the end of the day, it might inspire you to pick up one of her books and discover where the new horror really is, as opposed to what we've been talking about for about the last half hour. If you want the proof in the pudding, she's it. On that note, I will be giving away a copy of her new collection, Velocities. How this is going to run is this. If you want to be included in the contest, you're going to leave a comment on this video. Okay? But I need you to do something else when you do so. Go to your Amazon account and add it to your gift registry. You can very easily do it. The person who wins, I will purchase the book and it will be shipped directly from Amazon. I won't need you to do anything. But I need you to leave a comment below and to set up that gift registry for yourself with that book in there. Who knows, you might get more than just a copy of Velocities. So, Piz, what have you got for us?
I just wanted to thank everybody for tuning in, and I know I was sort of a last minute replacement when Stephen King canceled, so don't mind bad, big shoes to fill there, but thanks for including me tonight. It's always fun to shoot the bull with you about the genre and what have you, and that's really about it.
So everyone knows, Piz, when I was left without a guest for tonight and I was going to do a very fly by the seat of my pants show, actually reached out to me and volunteered to come on. So he's the bigger man in the conversation, and he's the one who deserves your undying love and respect. But he does not win arguments about the 5th Friday 13th. Thanks, everyone. Have a great night.
He's a very old guy, knows a lot about horror.